find you very rude. The Novympia channel is made possible by our gorgeous patrons who get access to the most unappealing crap you'll find anywhere on the whole internet.
Cue the snafu! After the mediocre reception to part 2, we're here doing part 3.
You'd have thought, wouldn't you, that we'd have run out of grim things.
Well, this is why we're moving out of Bournemouth and into Poole.
So this is going to be a bit of Bournemouth, but also a little bit of Poole, where we live. And for this, Nova, what have you got?
So we've done some research this year, and I've actually purchased books.
Like we don't normally.
That wording was sloppy, but go on.
Books, actual books. We've been using Haunted Poole by Julie Harwood for some paranormal stories, as well as Dorset Curious and Surprising by Roger Guttridge.
Where are we going at the moment, Char?
We are on our way to Castle Point.
What's going on at Castle Point?
Well, this voiceover will tell you.
A bomber on the loose, a town in fear. Behind the campaign of terror, a plot to extort millions from Britain's biggest retailer.
People will be injured and potentially killed.
The Tesco Bomber was a man who attempted to extort money from British supermarket chain Tesco in August of 2000. A blackmailer known only as Sally sent letters to Tesco stores threatening to harm customers if his demands for club cards, modified so that the holder could withdraw cash from ATMs, were not met. Although Tesco had actually started the process of making the modified club cards, letter bombs were mailed out. Most of them were intercepted, but one did make its way to a woman in an area of Bournemouth called Ferndown. The letters filled with gunpowder were rigged to explode using party poppers, although thankfully the woman only received minor injuries, and this was the only example of a bomb reaching its intended destination. Police were able to trace the origin of the blackmail letters to a postbox opposite a retail park called Castle Point, so this will be our first stop.
Okay, so we're at Starbucks, or Starbies as Char keeps saying, which is so annoying, which is at Castle Point, which is a retail park that Nova and I used to work at years ago. But around the other side of this building is the post box where police were able to trace the origin of the extortion letters. And they managed to surveil 38 people who posted on a day when they found a letter. And having interviewed all of these people, they narrowed it down to one guy who they witnessed acting suspiciously with a petrol can. And given that it was the nature of the offence was to do with bombs, they figured we'll interview this guy. They weren't allowed to look through any of the mail. Apparently, even police don't have the power to look through, like, royal mail. There's a word for it. It's sacrosanct. It's something to do with the Queen. I mean, for God's sake. Anyway. So then when they went to this guy's house, they searched through his house and found a Word document on his computer with one of the letters ready to go, ready to be printed. And when they asked him about this, he simply said, "Oh, I don't remember writing any of these letters." And they were just like, "That doesn't seem to hold much water, does it, darling?"
What I can't understand at the moment is you can't remember sitting at the computer drafting this letter.
I don't understand it either, but that is the case.
After a 6-month campaign of terror, the hunt for the Tesco Bomber was finally over.
So the postbox we're about to go to, he actually tried to set fire to. So I think it was either the first letter, was it? Or the second letter? I think he'd had second thoughts. He obviously posted it and was like, shit. So he just tried to set fire because the letter was fire damaged when it arrived.
So we'll go to his house in a minute. But yeah, we'll just go over and have a look at this magic postbox that we must have used in the past and had no knowledge of it.
So he was obviously found guilty and he was sentenced to 16 years, which was reduced to 12. And he was released in 2007.
Yeah.
And he lives...
Like 6 years. 7 years.
Yeah, he lives on the south coast of England is the only information we have for that. I just cannot imagine a more ridiculous plot.
No, it was not the...
That's why I feel like he wasn't the full ticket. He must have had some kind of like mental health problems or some... That's not a plot from a logically thinking person.
No.
Because if he ever planned on using one of the modified club cards, he would have been caught at an ATM. I mean, he was caught before he even got to that point. So how the hell did he think he was going to get away with it?
So he went into the off licence here to use their photocopier.
And he left
the original one.
He left the original letter in the... I mean, this guy was not
Again, I'm
slick.
telling you, not the full ticket.
He
Not
wasn't
all there.
slick.
So before we move on to the next story, the next location, we're going to go by an area of Bournemouth called Kinston to see the house that Robert Dyer lived in when he was exacting his cunning plot to extort Tesco out of club cards. So stupid. It's different now. I feel like I read that they had to sell off this house and rebuild it because it was so dilapidated. So it's a little bit different, but it's in the same location. So we'll swing by and see it.
This is at Caroline Road. So the house is at the very end of this road on the left. It's only a tiny road.
It is a tiny road.
But perhaps just... yeah, it's this one on the left. So while he did mail one kind of very remedial bomb that did go off at a location in Ferndown, he did threaten to plant bombs in people's gardens, and he said he had done one and it was never found. But apart from that,
It was a hoax.
it was a bit of a hoax.
Or maybe he did and he just didn't build it correctly and it was like no threat at all.
He also would communicate with the police through Bournemouth Echo. He gave them a
cipher.
like a cipher is the word I was looking for. The Echo would post it as like a Mensa puzzle, which no one could solve. But they found this cipher in his boiler in the kitchen. He'd like kind of hidden it and tucked it away in the top of the boiler. And when they searched his house, they found...
It's fascinating to me that the search would have been so thorough that they were literally looking around like the pipes of the boiler.
Incidentally, the pseudonym he used, which is Sally, that's how he would sign these letters off to the police, he called himself Sally, was also the name of his dog. So again, I mean...
Well, it wasn't an invisible at the time, it was a dog we used to
He
have.
had, but I mean, for God's sake, like, I mean, that's just a direct link, isn't it? It's just so stupid.
Leaving Kinston, we headed further west to a suburb called Bear Cross to visit the site of the brutal murder that occurred January 16th, 1960.
So this next story is about a lady who sadly died in this road. We were trying to find the location for a little while because she was found on a place called Wheeler's Lane, face down in the road. And Wheeler's Lane is a really strange shape. It curves around and then forks into a footpath, which is also called Wheeler's Lane. So I don't know if the footpath, you could drive down that during the time of her death, or if that's been made a footpath today, but it was a bit confusing. Anyway, the woman's name was Lilian Emily Maud Tharme. It is believed that the car of her murderer was abandoned in a ditch, a bit like in the area that we are now. Lilian was found dead in the snow in Wheeler's Lane with a stolen car nearby. She was found naked, face down in the frozen mud. Her clothes were found scattered around in the area. So some of her clothes were found nearby. Some of them were found in two separate piles between Wallaston Road, Wheeler's Lane, Waterworks Road. They were kind of strewn all around in the area. Early hours of the morning, she was coming home from a night out, and it's believed that she was knocked over by the driver of this stolen car and then stripped and was a victim of SA. If she had received proper medical treatment within a reasonable time, she might have survived, because ultimately it was ruled that she died succumbing to the cold weather and being naked. They came to the conclusion that she was alive when she was put in this car. So it was just the harsh weather that killed her ultimately. The car was described as a dark green Morris 1000 that had been stolen earlier from Talbot Avenue in Bournemouth, about 1.5 miles away. It was unusual as well because only the near side headlamp of the car was working. The offside one had been broken when it struck Lilian. So it would have been quite a recognisable car. Initially, I think this is ludicrous. They were wondering how she came to lose all of her clothes. I think that's just so stupid, being a young woman. Like, you've only got to put 2 and 2 together, haven't you? And then ultimately it was found out that she was a victim of SA. Wheeler's Lane is described as a lover's lane, a meeting place for courting couples, and this road was described as a muddy track. The car had been driven here and then it was run into an offside ditch and abandoned. The stolen car was described as being left in a ditch on this road, and we have an idea that it might be here. This is like the area that was described. Lilian was a mother of 4. She was described as small and plump. She only lived 2 miles away in Alder Road.
It is worth noting that because this happened so long ago, newspaper articles of the time were often very sort of clunky with how they would describe people. So
the description is small
and plump, which obviously is
touched
so
on that before.
irrelevant.
This woman being described as a spinster, I think, in the last video.
Yeah.
Yes. Her 46-year-old husband, who often accompanied her dancing, said that he had stayed home that night to look after the child whilst Lilian went to the dance with a group of friends. He said, if I had known she was walking home alone, I would have gone to meet her. The man that had taken Lilian Tharme to the dance said that he danced with her 4 or 5 times. He said after the dance ended at midnight that he and Lilian went upstairs to a private party in the sergeant's mess where there was more drinking, and that he could only vaguely remember leaving and couldn't remember the drive home. The police appealed for a man that Lilian was seen with at the dance at the drill hall on the Saturday night, describing him as 40 to 50 years old, 5'8", big build, a ruddy complexion. I'm not sure what they mean by a ruddy complexion.
Red in the face, yeah.
So Lilian Tharme's inquest concluded on Wednesday the 13th of April in 1960, and it did return a verdict of murder by some person or persons unknown. The pathologist that examined her body said that she had scratches and bruises that might have been caused by her body having been dragged over gravel, and added that certain other injuries could have been caused by an impact with a moving vehicle. So I think that the leading idea was that she was struck by a car, dragged, put in the car, stripped, abused, and then just left in the middle of the road. No one ever came forward. It was suspected she may have been regularly meeting with a man who was not her husband. Again, relevant to media coverage at this time, I think, was always looking to blame the victim. In March of 1960, the council approved a petition from 50 residents for the installation of lighting on this lane. The council did say that they would ask the residents to pay for half the cost of the lamps. Can you believe it? But you can see now that there are street lamps on this lane. This would have been terrifying in the dark in winter.
It would have been. But this is a very old road, you can tell. And there is a very, very long ditch that runs all the way alongside this road. So
before this was tarmac as well. This was just icy mud. This would have been a death trap.
This was absolutely it, I reckon. This is like the definition of a lover's lane.
Yeah,
and it's
quite secluded.
There's a ditch that runs all the way along. It gets a little bit wider up there, but it also gets a little more residential. So, and yeah, like Nova said, this wouldn't have been tarmac. This would have been.
It was described as being muddy,
which was face down in the ice.
Frozen mud, yeah.
So this would have been it.
So we're going now to our next story. If the previous two frustrated you, this next one certainly will. This next one is wild. So we're going to be talking about a man who was murdered May 1939, and he was found on his living room floor by his grandkids who were returning from a dance. And again, a lot of the information we're talking about here is pulled from police reports and newspapers from 1939, so some of the language is very flowery, shall we say. So in a second, we're just gonna walk out here and find 334 Poole Road, which is the former home of Walter Alfred Dinnivan, who was murdered at the age of 64 in his living room on the night of May 21st, 1939. This is now the third case we've looked at on this same stretch of road, after we covered the murders of both John Green and Claire Stagg in the Grimtals 1 and 2. Walter Dinnivan lived at this address with his granddaughter Hilda. He was a retired garage proprietor and a self-made man who had owned a number of properties in the district.
It was estimated that his estate was valued at £30,000, which is about 1.6 million today, so he had a few bob.
Jesus.
It was noted that despite his alleged respectability, he was undoubtedly an immoral man who was the father of 2 illegitimate children. Again, we're talking about the 30s. And since the death of his wife, which had occurred the year before, 1938, police inquiries showed that he had habitually associated with women of the prostitute class.
The prostitute
class. I mean, imagine like reporting that. It's just so ridiculous. He was noted for having boasted about his accumulation of money and to have made a vain display of certain expensive jewellery.
We're having trouble finding this this house. It's on the other side of this very large fence, but there's no access from this road. There may have been once upon a time, but there isn't now.
But he was in good health, excellent physical condition for his age, and as someone who was sometimes rather aggressive and not the type of person who was readily succumb to threats of violence or blackmail.
Walter was in excellent health for his age, but even so, on the night of his murder, he declined an offer from his granddaughter to join her at a dance with her brother and their friend, and he stayed at home to read a book. Hilda and her brother returned at about 11 p.m. and found that they could not access the flat, so they walked to the rear of the property.
The grandson broke the leaded glass panel of the main door, entered the drawing room and saw Walter on the floor. He was breathing but was unconscious. The house, which included a safe, appeared to be undisturbed. Police found a blood-stained paper bag on the floor, a piece of green paper. The paper bag and the piece of green paper were creased as though a weapon had been wrapped. He either fell or was thrown on the floor, where his assailant evidently knelt on his chest, fracturing his ribs, and also attempted to strangle him, before obviously using this weapon. The police report noted that the clasping by Walter in his hand of his denture was somewhat extraordinary, but thought that whilst he was being throttled, he might have felt a choking sensation, and to release the pressure, he took his teeth out of his mouth, which is a really weird kind of factoid.
It might be round the other side,
Yeah, I think that the access is now on the other road. The address has changed.
He was ultimately struck 15 to 20 times with a blunt object, most likely a hammer. It was noted in the police report that the locks on the garage doors were faulty, and it was therefore possible to gain access to the house through the garage without the use of a key. So, not hard to get in, but you might have prior knowledge of that.
I was going to say, that must have been like something you'd know, because no one else looking from an outside perspective would be like,
would have any idea.
That lock looks a bit funny, doesn't it? Like,
Walter was taken to Boscombe Hospital, where he died shortly after. He is buried in Wimborne Road Cemetery, just a stone's throw from the resting place of the Rattenberries, whose story we covered in the Grim Tour 1.
I don't think that's correct. I think it would have been a building here that was existing in this, because all these blocks are new. I think it was in this area here somewhere.
So we're having a bit of a debate, because this is the rear side of Poole Road. Now, none of these are detached houses. Obviously, these are all newer than a property that existed in the 30s.
But you said the building was still here and it was just a detached house that's been turned
I
into
didn't
flat.
know that it was still here.
Oh.
It just, the information I had was that it was a detached house that was converted into flats.
So which one's that red?
Now, there's a detached house over there that we're going to go and look at. It may be that one.
They found a hair curler in the living room, which was completely out of place, didn't belong to him or the granddaughter. And the police ended up interviewing a local fishmonger who was his friend. He didn't live far away, this friend, so we'll go afterwards and find where he lived. But this fishmonger, his wife was a hairdresser and used exactly the same brand of hair curler. And the police went and tried to purchase this brand of hair curler in various shops locally and couldn't find it. The exact same brand. His fingerprint was also found on a used tumbler at the crime scene, but he said he had visited Walter several times in the week before, and that's not a big deal. Although his granddaughter said that Walter was so compulsively neat he wouldn't have left unclean tumblers out if he wasn't there on the night. The bloody paper bag at the scene was also determined to be the same paper bags used by fishmongers.
Right.
I mean, this is piling up. There's so much here. The fishmonger, who his name isn't listed, by the way, this fishmonger, he was said to be financially embarrassed, and he tried to sell Walter a hat. Financially embarrassed is the term they've used.
Charlene.
Yeah.
I'm very financially embarrassed.
Yeah, you should.
I'm going to use that. Financially embarrassed.
He tried to sell Walter a house, but he turned him down. This guy had also been charged with 2 counts of arson to obtain insurance money, and there were cigarette ends found in the living room that bore traces of the fishmonger's blood type. The fishmonger was also described as abnormal and unstable, and had a newspaper cutting of Walter stuck above his bed.
Oh, that's a bit Yeah, but I've got newspaper.
How much more evidence do you want?
Above my bed.
No, you don't. You better not.
There's two possibilities. Either the numbers are not the same as they were in 1939 and his house is either now the vet's or there's a white one down there.
I think you might be right with the right one, because when you type it into Google, that's exactly where it says it is. Even though it's 328 now, I think
it's just that Google's trying to put you into the direction of the nearest
access.
Or
maybe.
his house no longer exists and it's in between in this kind of area where they built these blocks of flats.
The entire case was hinged on this hair curler. The prosecution obviously went in so hard on this hair curler, and the judge said, and I quote, "Is it suggested that the assailant took along with him a woman's hair curler? Is it the sort of thing people carry about? Ask yourself the question, do you really think, having regard to the very grave duty you have to discharge, that you can rely on a hair curler?" Which is a kind of fair point, but also...
No, bullshit. Where else would this hair curler have come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Also, he could have just had a bag with him and might have accidentally... It's not described what kind of hair curler it was.
The fishmonger gave evidence, and he said, "I never thought they would suspect an old man like me of killing him. The man could eat me. He was stronger than I am. Mr. Dinnivan had arms like a gorilla." He also said that he had never pestered Walter for money. Jury were absent for an hour before returning with their verdict of not guilty. And that's where the story ends. So they never found out who killed him, despite it
That is nutty though, isn't
obviously being evident that it was probably the fishmonger, right? Either way, we can't be sure where his house is, but it was on this road in one of these areas.
It's a very strange road because all of the buildings are obviously built in drastically different times. So there's a real mix of
Yeah.
different
architecture and style.
Yeah, there's like ones like this, there's like road, like the one next to us is a terrace, isn't it? And then... Right.
And then there should be a little road up here called Ingworth. Is it on the left at the end?
Yes.
But this is all an industrial estate now, so...
Yes.
Yeah, this is it. It was said that the fishmonger, who was the main suspect, lived on Ingworth Road at number 2. So when I put it into Google Maps, it didn't come up with any numbers, so...
Yeah, it looks like there's no residential properties anymore. It's
all an industrial estate. Yeah. But this tiny road here. Yeah, some
wealth management. This is offices.
Yeah.
Some
But that could have
location.
been flats. I mean, it looks like quite a new building, to be fair.
It does all look quite new, doesn't it? Yeah.
What
But-
was this, 39? Oh, yeah.
1939. This is where the fishmonger lived, somewhere along here.
Strange to think that there were all houses and stuff down there, wasn't it? There's been complete like flat.
Well, we are talking almost 100 years ago, best part of.
True.
So we are now on our way to Poole Park to have a look at a location mentioned in Haunted Poole. So Julie Harwood, the author, retells a story told to her by a local spiritual medium called David Austin, who lives in Parkstone, about 2 children named Gemma and Jonathan. So I'm going to read a bit directly from the book now about this story.
Poole Park is actually quite nice. I mean, there isn't like a huge amount to do in there, but
It's not wildly safe at night, I don't think.
it's
really?
safe at night.
No.
It's very picturesque.
It's
Yeah.
very pretty. They've got like pedal boats, do they?
Yeah.
Do you still have that?
There's like a little cafe there.
Like a little cave.
It is very nice, but since we've lived here, we've been there like once.
Yeah, maybe twice.
It wouldn't be the first thing on my list to go and do.
What would be your first thing to go and do?
Well, it just wouldn't be Poole Park.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Imagine coming in at night and seeing that and shit my knickers. What is that meant to be, some shit art installation? Not having that.
For years growing up, David lived near Poole Park, and as a child aged 10 in the 1980s, he played there most days after school with his friends. This is where he met Gemma and Jonathan. The pair were twins and wore funny clothes that David was not familiar with. Jonathan always wore braces and a cotton shirt with a necktie, and Gemma always wore the same pretty lemon dress with a big white frilly collar. They were nice children, and David believed their attire meant they were from the more affluent part of town. Nearly every day, David would meet the pair at the tree closest to the gates nights, and they would play hide and seek and sometimes sit and talk for hours. Gemma and Jonathan loved listening to the stories David told of his father's old cars, what homework he had that night, and what his pet dog Rancher had done at the weekend. David believed that the twins had a rather boring life and did not have any friends, as they rarely had stories to tell apart from talking about their mother Winifred. He often invited them to visit his house and to meet his family, but the twins always declined, saying they were not allowed to leave the park until their mother arrived to take them home. Poole Park has many different entrances with gates, so while this first entrance seemed like the obvious place to go, we saw that a photo in Haunted Poole showed an engraved plaque that was supposed to be close to the tree in the story. We concluded that it was likely we had entered Poole Park from the wrong side. So it's not described in great detail where this gate is in Poole Park, but there is a picture of a commemorative plaque, and that is not by this entrance.
I'm quite sure it's the other one down by the swimming pool, so...
Yeah, we're wondering maybe we want to go to the other end of the park. One day, David took his friend Peter to meet the twins. They waited in the usual place, but for the first time, Gemma and Jonathan did not arrive. Peter became bored and decided to leave. It was then, out of nowhere, David said he saw the twins appear by the tree. Not fully understanding what he was seeing, he ran home and told his mother. His mother told him a story about two local siblings who, in 1920 on a cold winter's day, had been left alone in the park. The twins waited patiently for their mother to return, as they had been told never to leave the park without her permission. However, she never returned. So we've managed to find this plaque, which I believe is going to be near where this tree is. So Poole Park is just around the corner. I think if we walk down there, we're going to find the tree where Jonathan and Gemma used to play. Let's have a look. The twins huddled under a tree, but due to the harsh winter weather, they died of exposure and their lifeless bodies were found at sunrise the next morning. David, being scared by the story, refused to return to the park. It was not until later in life, when he was developing his mediumship, that he returned to the park to privately thank Gemma and Jonathan for their help. If they had not appeared to him, he believes he would never have pursued mediumship in any way. When he returned to the park, he could sense them around and believed he could hear Gemma giggling, but sadly was not able to see them like he had done before. Are these two unfortunate children set to wander the park forever, waiting for their mother to collect them? David hopes that they have in fact moved on, and they maybe just come back occasionally to visit the park where they spent their last night.
Is there any, information on Gemma and Jonathan? Except for outside that, but an actual news article of...
Have a look.
I feel like...
It's called Winifred.
I've lived in Poole my whole life. I live just up the road from Poole Park without doxing myself. And Poole has quite a famous history with pirates. Every year we have Harry Paye Day. We'll be talking about him a little bit later on in more detail, but that's where the whole town comes out. Oh, it sounds so stupid. Dressed up as pirates, and there's a festival on the Quay, things like that. So we're going to go to the Quay now, which is just a couple minutes drive away. We're going to have a little look around, some ghosty, spooky bits, and then talk some more on the pirate history, is the word I was looking for.
I didn't realise this. Well, you've lived here your whole life. We're new here. Poole has such a... It's a very long history. It's been here since the 12th century. So since the 1100s, there's been a recorded use of the name Poole as a town. This area of Britain has been inhabited for at least 2,500 years. Yeah.
Has it really?
Can you imagine?
No.
Before we delve into Poole's history of pirates, we look at 3 haunted locations on Poole Quay. When we parked the car, we realised that the car park itself was built on the former site of a large grain mill and silo. The enormous concrete structure was built in the mid-19th century by a grain company called Christopher Hill, but was abandoned in 1987 and remained derelict, infested with rats, until it was demolished in 2008. For 2 decades while it lay empty, Poole residents claimed to witness a white figure on the roof of the grain silo, either peering over the railings or sitting with his legs hanging over the edge. Fearing that he was about to jump from the roof, witnesses would call Dorset police to check on the man, but no one was ever found. Around the corner from the site of the old grain silo is the King Charles Inn, a pub which is said to be haunted by a former landlady and a sailor who both met a tragic end sometime in the 1700s.
So, first of all, on our trip of Quay is our very own Romeo and Juliet story. It happened at the King Charles Inn, which I believe, it might say in this, is one of the oldest buildings in Poole, if not the oldest building. So this was originally named the New Inn, but when King Charles X docked at Poole Quay in 1830, they changed the name in his honour. So the inn is said to be haunted, and most people presume the ghost is King Charles X of France. However, this does not appear to be the case. The actual tale of the resident ghost is a much sadder one. So the paranormal activity in the pub has included bottles and glasses smashing for no reason, heavy footsteps, items disappearing, and the owner's pets refusing to even enter certain parts of the pub, including many of the rooms upstairs. The ghosts that are said to haunt the pub are a pretty but sad young lady and a sailor. In the 18th century, the pub's landlady fell deeply in love with a local sailor, and they pledged their devotion to each other. He had to set sail on a long journey, so the pair promised to stay true to each other until his return, when they would get married. Months later, when the sailor was due to return, a huge storm hit the seas, and when he did not arrive back, the landlady feared he had been killed at sea. In desperation, she took a thick rope and hung herself on one of the upstairs beams. Only a matter of days later, exhausted from his treacherous journey, the sailor returned to the inn to be reunited with his sweetheart. When he arrived at the inn, he found it unusually locked and had to break in. He found his love still hanging in the upstairs room. Distraught beyond all belief, the heartbroken young sailor is said to have pulled her down from the rope and then, in a fit of despair and grief, with a dagger, took his own life.
I mean, these are the wooden beams, aren't they?
Yeah, and they look pretty original. She can't possibly, she'd have been short.
Oh no, look.
You made me jump then.
There are beams up there. What are you looking at? Oh my god.
It makes me flip like actually blood from cold.
There's beams up there even higher though, look.
That's true. This is truly Poole's own Romeo and Juliet story, and it's said that the pair remain in the building trying to reunite with each other, the lady repentant because of the way she pointlessly ended her own life, and the sailor reliving the night he found his true love hanging. Apparently, most people notice cold spots, feel someone sitting next to them, or smell the sweet fragrance of lavender water when the lady is near. When the sailor is around, there is said to be an overwhelming aroma of the sea and the feeling of anger.
So, Poole has a Romeo and Juliet story.
It does.
Which is very, very heartbreaking.
It's interesting to me that the old, wattle and daub area is the extension. I'd have thought that would have been.
So this says 1770, and then that one over there is 1350. What is the story you have about this beam sticking out?
The beam just up there with the chains hanging from it. I've heard once before, hundreds of years ago, someone hung themselves and they were found facing the quay. They hung themselves in front of intentionally beautiful view, which was at the time obviously the quay.
We don't come down here very often, but it does feel, the roads are tiny, there's cobblestones, and the street lights. It kind of feels a little bit like you've stepped into the past. I have never walked down here before. It literally feels like a set. It just doesn't really feel real. And also the fact that no one is here also is very eerie.
There were more stories in our books than we had time to cover, but we were able to spot a few supposedly haunted buildings on the way to the next location. We walked past St George's Almshouses, a medieval building devoted to the use of the port for 500 years. On dark winter nights, it is said that the figure of a priest can be seen walking the perimeter of this building. Further down the street is arguably the most infamous haunted house in Poole, the Crown Hotel.
So this is the Crown Hotel, Char, which to me is kind of annoying because doesn't it stick out like a sore thumb painted in that green colour?
I don't know, because a lot of, if you go up and down the quay, a lot of the old tiles and stuff are in that kind of bottle green.
Oh, are they?
So I think a lot of that colour is in keeping with the old... Would you call that a bottle green? At the bottom, they call that kind of colour.
While we were standing outside the Crown Hotel, the manager walked by and overheard our conversation. She insisted that the hotel is in fact haunted by the children whose story features in our book.
I've actually got a rule that you can read that's actually about the history of the hotel. I've actually got a rule
Inside?
Inside, yes. It's actually, yes. About the, actually, that goes right back to the 1800s itself. Yes, it's actually about the... Yes.
But people talk about it being haunted.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of secret cellars in there, yes. The effect is out of bounds itself.
That's terrifying. Have you ever experienced anything?
We've actually got a picture of a girl, right about a girl, a ghost, yes. We've actually got pictures inside.
Oh.
Yeah, we do, yes.
So this is known as the most haunted building in Poole. It's known by ghost hunters all over the world, apparently. It's a 17th century coaching inn, originally, and as part of the old town, it would always have been the centre of the locals' lives. The paranormal experiences at the Crown Hotel centre around the local legend that in the 17th century, the owner of the building, embarrassed as to what people would think, chained his twin children, whom suffered from physical maladies, to a wall in the attic from public view. Eventually, the children perished, and rather than face any consequence, their father buried them under the floor of the cellar. More than 400 years on, the screams of the tortured children could still be heard echoing through the hotel. Oh, wow. The sounds of screaming children heard that.
That's the story that we're talking about, the screaming children.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly it.
Is this in the cellar, this picture here?
This is actually a secret little passage.
Can you see that as a glare?
I don't love that.
Renovations to the hotel in the 1960s were said to have disturbed parts of the building that had not been touched in hundreds of years. During this time, paranormal activity was said to be at its highest. A piano was heard playing a single note even when it was locked. The manager of the hotel directed us to a hidden stairwell that led to the cellar, where the photo of the girl was taken.
It's quite eerie.
So is there a cellar at the bottom?
Yes. And actually, there's one of our bedrooms actually that comes from the top down to the bottom, yes.
In 1966, a hotel employee witnessed objects flying across the room and fled the hotel after seeing what he described as a fluorescent mist.
So did you know that was there then? The door, you knew it was there, yeah. You wouldn't know, would you? You wouldn't know.
In fact, this was closer.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit Winchester Housey, isn't it, with all the little doors everywhere, yeah?
I was convinced of anything.
I feel like a lot of the lanes and streets around here are probably named after what was imported, given that it's a port. But the whole town, certainly this area, just smells like Lush. Because was Lush not
It was
founded in Poole?
This was the original Lush shop, and now they're all over the world.
Heading back toward the quayside, we passed a building known to anyone who grew up in Poole called Scaplen's Court. Scaplen's Court is a 15th century Grade 1 listed house. It's now used as a museum focusing on life in Poole between the 15th and 19th centuries.
Char, what is Scaplen's Court?
So Scaplen's Court is like a museum kind of thing, sort of. But if you go to school in Poole, you've more than likely been, or you went to school in Poole, you've more than likely been to. It's one of those things that do school trips on.
There's actors doing
and there's
reenactments
doing
and stuff.
scullery maids, and you see how they used to make bread and shit like that.
Okay.
So despite the restful and tranquil appearance of that house today, in the late 1500s it was the scene of a bloody double murder.
Alice Green was a rich widow who lived at Scaplen's Court with her maid Agnes Beard. On a fateful night in 1598, Alice's son-in-law John Berryman entered the house to murder her and steal a large sum of money that she kept upstairs. He took a hatchet to her head and also killed Agnes the maid. While they lay dead, John took £200, worth about £40,000 today, and fled.
No one is sure what happened to him after this, but his guilty spirit is said to haunt the building, repentant for his evil deeds. As well as his victim's screams being heard, the ghost of Agnes Beard is still seen to this day, coming out of the buttery and crossing the courtyard before disappearing by the stairs that climb up to the main house.
Right, so we're probably not going to go in there then.
Probably not. It's a Grade 1 listed building. They're doing specialist conservation.
Have you been in there, Glenn?
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if you're from here.
There's a gate down there.
We did a school trip
I wonder if you can see
and we did like Tudors and things. And we sang like sea shanties upstairs and things like that.
Sea shanties?
Yeah, they had like a wheel with like, what's that thing in the ship called where you'd all push it to like raise the sail?
Did one of them?
And things like that.
Well, you didn't really learn much then. You didn't know the name of the wheel.
One of those like school trip things.
Our final location is Poole Quay itself, which has a strong association with smugglers. But not everyone who had a tragic end in the quay met their fate at the hand of pirates. So we are just by the car park where we've parked, but this is the quay just here. And Sunseeker's here, obviously, that constructs all of these yachts. But this was also the location of a man who disappeared from a yacht, his own private yacht. He was having a
a party on this yacht in 1903. The man's name was John Edwin Cooper.
On the warm, still evening of August 15th, 1903, John Cooper, a man of independent means, had a dinner party on his yacht Gladys in Poole Harbour with his wife, children and some friends. A doctor who had accompanied John on the cruise was tasked with recounting the timeline of the evening to police.
He said that they anchored in Poole Harbour and that in the evening after dinner, John went on deck to smoke whilst he remained below with the ladies, and at some point in the next 2 hours he disappeared and a search failed to reveal his whereabouts. So I think the yacht was pretty much moored. It wasn't as if they were going off into the sea over there.
At the inquest, the doctor said that he knew nothing about John Cooper's health and was only giving evidence in the capacity of a normal witness, adding that he had never treated John Cooper professionally.
When the doctor was asked to describe his manners at the table, he described John as eccentric, noting that he was perfectly sober the night of the parties, and you might assume that he had just had a few, gone up and then fallen overboard, but he was perfectly sober is the description.
When the captain of the yacht gave evidence, he said that John Cooper had on occasion been low-spirited.
I guess to infer, obviously, that it's not outside the realms of possibility that he purposefully jumped into the sea. He was discovered 10 days later, found in the water on Hook Sands off of Brownsea Island by some Poole fishermen. So Brownsea Island is located Yay direction over there. And Brownsea Island, there isn't much on Brownsea Island, is there?
It's where the first ever scout camp took place with Maid and Powell.
Char knowing things. But he was discovered there, so he had at some point in the night fallen off of this yacht, fallen into the sea, and he drifted over towards Brownsea Island. The jury returned an open verdict of found drowned. So that's all they could conclude. So his family never heard anything, they didn't hear him fall in, and they never figured out exactly what happened to him. But this is where that party was happening on his private yacht.
Is it worth saying as well, that as well as Lush being found in Poole, Sunseeker was as well?
Well, you've just said it, Char. There's an extra bit of information for you, apparently. Sunseeker was also found today. Who knew Poole was such a notable place? Oh, because you worked there?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did.
I did. I worked.
You've worked everywhere, Glenn.
I have. I have a very colourful life.
A checkered past.
Yeah, all that.
No, it takes you to France.
Does that take you to Brownsea Island? Is that a serious question?
It's a bit unnecessary. Which one takes you to Brownsea?
Further along the quayside sits a grand Georgian building once known as the King's Custom House. It's currently used as a restaurant, but is said to be haunted by the ghost of a traitor who was killed by his crew. An incident that occurred at the Customs House in 1747 has gone down in British smuggling history. The infamous pirate Jack Diamond was captured here on Poole Quay and his smuggled tea stored at the Customs House.
Angry that their cargo had been seized, the rest of Jack's men, who were in fact his brothers, enlisted the help of the Hawkhurst gang from Kent. Armed, they stormed Poole one night and battered down the door of the Customs House, taking back all the tea and freeing Jack. It was a bloody battle between smugglers and guards, but the smugglers got away with as much of the precious commodity as they could.
After the raid, a traitorous member of the gang named Carter informed on Jack and his brothers. When they discovered this, they took Carter to a local well where he was stoned and drowned for his betrayal. Of the 60 men in Jack's gang, 14 were ultimately captured and hanged, while Jack disappeared. Local legends suggest that a mysterious man spotted at the Customs House at dusk is that of Carter returning to the scene of the crime looking to avenge his murder. Staff at the Customs House have often sensed a feeling of being watched.
A man in the dark coat and the wide-brimmed hat has been seen by a number of people, seemingly floating by the quayside. When approached, the figure simply turns and disappears.
The Customs House isn't the only place that ghostly pirates have been spotted in Poole. The town still has small smuggling alleys, some with the remnants of old trolley rails embedded in the stone. One of these places, as listed in Haunted Poole, is Tharme Street.
So like Char said in the car, if you talk about Poole and the history of Poole, you're going to talk about pirates. As a port, it's quite known for a lot of pirate activity. Even the Dorset
football team after it, the Poole
Pirates, even the accent, the Dorset accent, accent round here is very stereotypically piratey.
Dorset. Arr.
And we're here on Sarum Street. Well done, Char, that was excellent. Because people report, and we were going to look for it, but I think we've literally found it, and it's this area right here, which is where people see the ghosts of smugglers. What were you saying, Char, about some of these roads being narrow? They're smugglers' lanes.
Lots of the things around here were all known as like Smugglers Lanes. When we walked around by that Sainsbury's and stuff, like where Lush was,
Yeah.
there's a lot more like little bits there, narrow little alleyways that go under like round houses and stuff. And I think there was like underground tunnels they used to use too, but I don't think we have access to those at the moment. The partly cobbled lane of Sarum Street lies directly behind the old town storage cellars, which now operate as a museum. It is believed that on some nights, if you were to walk down this alley, you will feel a cold breeze and the sensation of many people pushing past you as if in a hurry to get somewhere. They are thought to be a gang of pirates, this area having been a quick escape from the landing point on the quay.
It is reported that you may also be able to smell burning, and this is believed to be a place memory of when the town cellars that originally stood there completely encircling the old town were burnt to the ground in 1405. Even though this is one of the main connecting roads to the old town, some locals refuse to walk down it at night in fear they may run into Poole's old crooks.
So we know about Jack and the ghosts of the smugglers, but the most famous pirate from Poole, Char mentioned this earlier on, was a guy called Harry Paye, who was alive late 14th, early 15th century. And he was celebrated. I mean, he would ravage French and Spanish ships. So I'm sure the French and Spanish would not agree that he was a hero, but here, at least then, he was considered a hero. So much so, I mean, he would just plunder these ships of just everything and just bring it here to Poole. So much so that the British government at the time gave him a cushy little, essentially like an office job in his later life when he could no longer be a pirate.
So there are 3 chalk formations in Purbeck, which is not a million miles from here, known as Old Harry Rocks. It's really, really famous. You probably would recognise looking at it and not even realise what it was. It's been in loads of film and television, and they get their namesake from Harry Paye. It was said that he would hide behind the rocks on his ship awaiting passing merchantmen.
You can see Old Harry Rocks from Bournemouth Beach, can't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sandbanks, I think, as well. You can see them
Yeah.
well all along the coast.
Because it's this like peninsula
Yeah,
it curves
so
around, so you can see it from quite a few different viewpoints. So it is said even today that when Poole finds itself in times of need, you only need to look to the horizon and you can see Harry's ship there watching over the town.
So this is the end of the Grim Tour 3. We've done it.
Yeah.
Another one in the can.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
No.
And Charmaine earlier on said she can't wait to do one next year because then she gets to say the Grim Tour Fua.
I really like that we focused on Poole a bit more this year.
Yeah, I did.
And I like that we got to include a few more paranormal bits and pieces. And some history of the town as well. Yeah, it's been really fun this year.
I think easily the best part must be when the manager of the Crown invited us inside to show us that.
That was so interesting.
That cellar bit. And thank you to our brand new patrons, Maple Wise, Justin H, Emperor's Child, Ronnie Brake and Mia Thomas.